The ice hit my cheek before the sting found my eyes. Carbonation fizzed across the conference table, racing under laptops and glossy charts, while a circle of expensive watches pulled back to save their sleeves. The overhead lights hummed cold and white, turning each droplet into a bead of silver as it ran down my blouse. Amanda didn't flinch. She smiled the way a person smiles when they win, without earning it lazy, satisfied mien. "Clean it up, janitor." Her voice carried over the quiet like a slap. Chairs creaked. Someone at the far end stifled a laugh and failed. I reached for napkins with hands that did not shake, not yet pressing the thin paper against soda that bled into the wood like a bruise. My sister leaned back, crossing her legs, admiring her reflection in the dark screen before it woke again to a spreadsheet that lied. "If you were standing in that room, you would have heard the air conditioner before you heard a single apology." Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever swallowed your pride to keep the peace at work or at home, tap the like button, share this with someone who needs it, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next chapter. To understand how a cup of Diet Coke became a verdict, you need to know where it began. I grew up in a brick house west of Chicago, where the porch light clicked on at 7:30 every evening, and my father's briefcase hit the oak bench by the door 30 seconds later. He built Davis Tech Solutions out of spare parts, and stubbornness, starting in a rented storefront near a commuter line, the kind of place where winter came in under the door and coffee was always burned. He believed in clean books, clean hands, and telling a client no, when no was what kept them safe. Amanda liked a stage even at 12. She wore the firstborn crown like it came with a deed and a parking space. When I won my 4th grade spelling bee, she spilled fruit punch over the certificate and called it an accident, red soaking into the paper until the letters blurred and my name bled. When I made varsity basketball as a sophomore, she told 2 mothers by the bleachers that the coach had a soft spot for girls who smiled at him. She never said it to my face. She didn't need to. She liked to salt the ground and watch from her window. When our parents divorced, the house quieted the way a church empties after the last hymn. Dad kept the company. Mom kept the china, the house, and the story she told herself about balance. Amanda moved into Dad's office like a favored shadow, carrying coffee she didn't brew and ideas she didn't test. I chased my own horizon. Stanford then, Harvard, then 10 years of sharpening my teeth on other people's problems until the blade of my judgment could split a ledger line and hear it sing. Dad died on a Tuesday. He was 64 and stubborn to the end, insisting the pain in his shoulder would pass once the board meeting was over. It didn't. I flew home too late, held my mother while her perfume clung to my coat like a promise, and watched Amanda take the head of a table she hadn't built. When the papers settled, Mom said the words that thinned the air. "Your sister has been here, Sophia. You have your own life." She smiled the soft smile of someone trying to make a wound polite. I went back to San Francisco and built Sterling Solutions with Jack, 50 employees, late nights, clean wins. Every Christmas, I sent Mom and Amanda the glossy spreads when a magazine wrote about our turnarounds. No reply ever came. The silence between us grew a moss of its own, soft to the touch, slippery underfoot. The call came in March rain, pushing stripes down my window, while the city stacked headlights on the Bay Bridge like beads. "Your father's company is weeks from bankruptcy," my mother said, voice thin as tissue. "Amanda's selling to Value Corp for $12 million. The board doesn't know about the consulting contracts. I think..." She paused to breathe. "I think they're tanking it on purpose." I stood at the window with the phone pressed to my ear and watched the streetlights spread gold across the wet. $12 million was what you paid for a building and a parking lot, not 30 years of clients who still sent Christmas cards, not the code written on weekends when the heat wouldn't quit. I asked questions because that's what a consultant does when her heart starts racing faster than her judgment. The answers tasted like copper. My mother had something else, a proxy written into my father's will that gave her 40% voting power. My 10% sat beside it, quiet and sharp. "Come home," she said. "Come without your name. Look for yourself. Then do what you think is right." I booked a one-way flight, cut my hair to the bone, and added caramel the color of burnt sugar. I swapped my green eyes for brown lenses and pulled on a navy skirt that looked like it had learned the rules and never broken them. In the mirror, I saw a woman who could walk into a fourth-floor HR office and be handed a badge without anyone lifting their eyes. The lobby at Davis Tech smelled like old coffee and lemon cleaner. Fingerprints glossed the elevator buttons, and the logo on the glass door had started to peel at the corners like a sticker on the back of a teenager's phone. The security guard waved me through without looking up. HR was one woman and a stack of forms that leaned like a snowdrift. 20 minutes later, I was Sophia Bennett, administrative assistant workstation, by the supply closet temporary login that belonged to somebody named Charlie who had stopped showing up the week before. The office wore its worry like a too-tight collar. Fluorescents flickered. Keyboards clicked without rhythm. People spoke in the tone of those who had learned that walls listened and walls told. On the carpet, high-traffic patches had grayed like old knees. The company that had once hummed now whispered. Amanda arrived at 10:45 with an entourage and a perfume that turned the air to powder. She moved through the cubes without seeing faces exactly as I remembered, exactly as I had hoped to be wrong. "You," she said, eyes sliding across me as if checking a receipt. "Coffee orders notes, and I want a Diet Coke. Not too much ice." She smiled the smile of someone testing the fence for weak boards. I carried cups that burned my fingers and listened. The CFO showed slides that did not line up with the invoices I'd seen that morning. A marketing VP joked about a legacy client who'd been calling like a jealous ex. My sister waved away names my father would have stood up for at their children's baptisms. I placed the drinks where she pointed and made the mistake that every new person makes once. Coke 0. Not diet. "What is this?" 4 words flat and sharp, followed by a silence that made me smaller on purpose. I said I'd fix it. She stood, lifted the cup, and threw. The cold hit like a wake-up. Ice skittered across the table and landed in Greg's lap. Tiffany choked out a laugh and covered it with a cough. Jordan pretended to check a phone that had lit up 2 minutes ago and gone dark. I dabbed at the table until the napkins went soft and came apart. I said, "Yes, Miss Davis," because the janitor she imagined would have kept his job that way, and the woman I was becoming understood that not all dignity wears its head high. Through the glass, a few heads turned and turned back again. Pity lives with fear in offices like that. They share the rent. In the bathroom, I locked a stall and listened to the hum of the building work through the pipes. The mirror above the sinks showed soda darkening the silk at my collarbone. I should have felt shame rise like heat. Instead, something colder slid into place, heavy and exact, the feeling I get right before I fix a thing that pretends it can't be fixed. The cardigan found me before I asked. Rachel from accounting stepped in with a tote bag and a soft knock on the mirror. "Keep spares?" she said, eyes kind but not nosy. "Staplers last month. Long story." I thanked her, pulled the navy over my blouse, and let the fabric lie flat beneath my palm until my breath matched the hum in the walls. Small kindness can hold more weight than it looks built for. I memorized the way it felt. I went back to my temporary desk by the supply closet and started watching the world the way my father taught me. Quiet, exact, relentless. In the pile of copies the courier had dropped too fast, I found consulting invoices from companies born last quarter, with addresses that matched mail drops, not offices. Expense reports rounded off like a child's first try at math. Termination letters for people who had trained the people who replaced them, and a calendar entry for Friday 2 p.m. Value Corp final presentation. At my lunch break, I walked outside and stood under a pin oak that had learned to grow beside concrete. Chicago wind tugged my hair and pushed grit against my lips. I thought about the plant manager my father once drove 2 hours to see when a shipment went wrong, about the way his hands trembled the night he signed his first $1 million contract because he knew the weight of other people's mortgages. I watched a bus hiss to a stop, and a woman stepped down carefully guarding a paper bag, like it held something that mattered. I went back upstairs and made my face blank again. The day emptied itself of noise the way a house empties after a fight. At 5:30, the floor thinned to a few stubborn lamps and the chatter of a broken printer in need of a roller. From my corner, I heard laughter from the executive suite like glassware clinking in a room with a locked door. I stayed an extra hour to organize the supply cabinet and found the password list that someone had taped under a drawer like a secret key. Security had given up months ago. People always tell on themselves. That night in my hotel, I lined up what I knew on a yellow legal pad, each line a thread waiting to be pulled. I texted Jack a photo of the skyline from my window and told him I was fine. He sent back a thumbs up and a promise to cover a client call in the morning, then asked if I'd eaten. I hadn't. I ordered soup that arrived lukewarm with a plastic spoon, ate sitting on the bed, and listened to the radiator tick like a clock finding its courage. On Wednesday, I asked questions that sounded like errands. By Thursday, I knew which servers held what and how many fingers had been in pies that didn't belong to them. Rachel checked totals with me without asking why I cared. David from IT noticed the way I noticed and slipped me a look that said, "If you're going to wade into this swamp, I'll hand you a rope." We spoke in the language of people who have both learned that truth is a currency with an unstable exchange rate. Then Friday came. The good suit waited in my garment bag, the one that fits like an oath. My green eyes sat in their case on the nightstand. I pinned back my hair and let the mirror show me two versions of a face, one brown-eyed woman who could take notes and one who could take a company back without raising her voice. I stood in the lobby at 1:20 and watched a black sedan pull to the curb like a verdict. Value Corp climbed out in perfect navy carrying leather portfolios that looked like they'd never been set down on anything rough. Upstairs, the conference room lights were already burning hot on false numbers and borrowed courage. I smoothed the cardigan Rachel had given me over the ruined blouse and walked toward the elevator badge cold against my chest, heartbeat steady as a metronome. The doors opened with a bell that sounded too cheerful for what waited. A handful of employees looked up, then down, then back to the emails that would not save them. Somewhere, ice clinked into a glass. Somewhere my sister practiced a smile. I stepped and pressed 4 and watched my own reflection tremble in the brushed steel until it steadied. By the time the doors slid apart, I knew exactly what I would do and exactly how alone I would have to be to do it. The elevator doors opened onto the 4th floor, and the sound that met me wasn't conversation. It was caution. Keys tapping without rhythm, phones ringing half-heartedly, shoes crossing old carpet that muffled more than it revealed. The air in that office felt like it had forgotten what laughter was supposed to sound like. I returned to my desk by the supply closet and slipped the cardigan tighter around me. The scent of cola had faded, but a faint stickiness still clung to my skin, a quiet reminder of the morning's humiliation. I opened a blank document and started typing notes that had nothing to do with coffee orders or meeting minutes. Every few minutes, my eyes lifted toward Amanda's office door. It stayed shut most of the day. When 5 o'clock came, I didn't leave. I pretended to file invoices, printing duplicates to justify staying after hours. That was when David from IT stopped by carrying an armful of cables. He gave me a tired half-smile and asked if I had computer trouble. I told him my login had locked me out, which wasn't true, but it bought a moment to study him. His badge was worn, edges frayed from years of swiping through the same door. He sat down, typed for a minute, and shook his head. "This system's older than me," he muttered. I smiled carefully. "Do you like it here?" He looked around before answering. I used to. That night back at the hotel, I wrote down everything I'd seen and heard, the names of the executives, the fake invoices, the tension that hung like smoke in the corridors. Each note felt heavier than the last. The next morning, I arrived early enough to catch the cleaning crew leaving. In the soft yellow light, I walked the hallways and took photos, peeling paint-locked off offices and a break room fridge full of expired yogurt cups. At 10:30, Amanda arrived again. Her heels struck the tile like punctuation marks, each step ending whatever conversation dared to start. She swept through the office in a blur of perfume and impatience. Her assistant trailed behind her, whispering updates that Amanda waved away without listening. By noon, I was sent to copy a stack of reports that were labeled internal only. While the printer hummed, I noticed that half the pages were duplicates of earlier ones, only with different numbers. Someone was falsifying financials, and they didn't even bother to hide it well. I slipped one sheet into my folder, telling myself I would replace it later. Rachel caught me on the way back. She handed me a folder of vendor receipts and said quietly, "If anything happens to me, these explain why." She didn't smile. She didn't have to. The truth had its own weight between us. We started eating lunch together at her desk, a pair of tuna sandwiches and lukewarm coffee that neither of us really tasted. She told me about the old days when William Davis, my father, used to walk the floor twice a day shaking hands and remembering everyone's name. People worked hard for him, she said. Not out of fear, out of respect. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. I heard he was that kind of man. Over the next few days, I learned the rhythm of the building. The good employees arrived early, left late, and kept their heads down. The others, Amanda's circle, came in just before noon, laughed too loudly, and treated the company like a private club. I saw the delivery records for their office furniture, Italian leather chairs, custom glass desks, 2 espresso machines charged to operational morale. The invoices made me sick. Late Wednesday, David appeared again, closing the door behind him. "You didn't get this from me," he said, handing me a flash drive. "It's the server logs from the last 6 months. You might want to look at the expense folder." His eyes met mine, a quiet acknowledgement of risk. "And change your password. The CFO's assistant likes to snoop." I stayed up most of that night going through what he'd given me. Buried in hundreds of files were wire transfers to companies I didn't recognize, consulting fees to shell firms with no websites, no employees, and identical invoice formats. The amounts were round, neat, and frequent. Someone had built a machine for bleeding the company dry. By morning, exhaustion had dulled into focus. I stopped by Rachel's cubicle and whispered that I needed her help confirming some figures. She didn't ask why. By noon, we'd uncovered over $100,000 in strategic services that never existed. It was fraud, clean and simple, buried under 1,000 small lies. Amanda spent that afternoon preparing for the upcoming meeting with Value Corp. She stood by the window of her office phone pressed to her ear, rehearsing the pitch I had already read in her drafts. $12 million is fair given market decline, she said, her voice smooth. And yes, our consulting arrangement post-acquisition remains as agreed. She hung up and saw me through the glass, but didn't recognize the look in my eyes. That night, my mother called. She sounded relieved just to hear my voice. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked. "You've been quiet." I didn't tell her about the coke or the humiliation. I only said, "I'm learning everything I need to know." After hanging up, I stood at the hotel window and watched the traffic below. The city was a moving river of red taillights, each one heading somewhere safer than where I stood. I thought of my father again, how he would pause before big decisions, his thumb resting against his chin, the weight of every employee's mortgage sitting in that silence. He had trusted Amanda once. That mistake had killed more than just a company's reputation. The next morning, I walked into the office early enough to see the sunrise reflecting off the glass towers across the street. The light hit the Davis Tech logo on the door, peeling it just a little more. I sat down at my desk, pulled out my notebook, and began to outline my next move. By mid-morning, the office buzzed with tension. Amanda had scheduled an all-hands meeting for later that day, important announcements according to the internal memo. People whispered that the sale to Value Corp was nearly finalized. Rachel caught my arm as I passed. "They're celebrating upstairs," she said. "Champagne. They think it's done." I walked to the restroom, locked myself inside, and leaned against the sink. My reflection looked calm, almost detached. But inside, the quiet was breaking apart. This wasn't just business mismanagement. It was theft from the legacy my father left behind and from the people who had given their lives to build it. I knew what I had to do. That evening, after everyone left, I stayed behind again. The cleaning crew knew me by now and barely looked up. David met me in the server room with a nervous smile. Together, we accessed Amanda's email archive. For 2 hours, we downloaded everything: contracts, financial statements, personal messages. Each new file confirmed what I already suspected: the sale to Value Corp was a cover for a payout to Amanda and her team. When we were done, David unplugged the flash drive and handed it to me. "Be careful," he said softly. "People like her don't go down quietly." I thanked him, slipped the drive into my bag, and walked to the parking lot. The night air carried the smell of rain. I stood there a long time, watching the lights of the city tremble against the clouds, until I finally understood what I was feeling. It wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. The next morning, Amanda strolled through the office, unaware that everything was already shifting beneath her feet. Her laughter filled the hallway as she teased Greg about a client dinner that didn't exist. Tiffany followed her, carrying a stack of reports she clearly hadn't read. They passed me without a word, their voices trailing off down the corridor. Rachel met my eyes across the cubicles, her expression cautious but certain. She didn't need an explanation. Some truths don't require words. That afternoon, I met with my mother in a quiet corner of the downtown cafe where my father used to take us for Sunday breakfasts. She looked tired, her once steady hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. "It's worse than you think," I said. "They've been fabricating records, diverting funds, and selling the company for pennies. Value Corp isn't buying Davis Tech. They're dismantling it." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed even. "Then you know what you have to do." She slid a folder across the table: legal papers, the proxy transfer she'd promised. I opened it, checked the signatures, and nodded. "Once I act," I said, "there's no turning back." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Then don't turn back." When I left the cafe, the air had grown colder. The clouds above the skyline carried the color of wet stone. I walked the few blocks back to my hotel, every step deliberate. Inside, I laid out the documents, the flash drives, and the photographs in careful order across the desk. Evidence, motive, opportunity, it was all there. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, the sound of something breaking open. I packed everything into my briefcase, turned off the lights, and stood by the window one last time. Below me, the city kept moving, unaware of the reckoning waiting inside one old office tower. Tomorrow, I would walk through those doors, not as a new hire or a forgotten daughter, but as the rightful heir to what my father built. Amanda wouldn't see it coming. And for the first time in years, I felt calm. Friday arrived with a stillness that felt deliberate, the kind of calm that settles over a city right before a storm. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep, and watched the Chicago skyline turn from gray to pale gold through the hotel window. Down below, the streets were slick from overnight rain. Everything looked clean, as if waiting for something new to begin. I laid out my clothes carefully on the bed, a charcoal gray suit, the same one I wore the day I signed the incorporation papers for Sterling Solutions. It was my armor now. My green contact lenses sat in their case beside a cup of black coffee, untouched and cooling fast. I replaced the brown ones, brushed my hair, until it caught the morning light again and stared at my reflection long enough to remember who I really was. By 8, I was in the office. The atmosphere carried a quiet strain. Even the hum of computers seemed tense. The Value Corp. Executives were due at 2. The entire building was being polished for their arrival, windows, wiped carpets vacuumed, and the scent of expensive coffee drifting from the break room. Amanda's laughter echoed from her office high and bright as she gave last-minute orders to her team. I stayed at my desk, pretending to organize spreadsheets, while Rachel passed by a file tucked under her arm. She paused just long enough to whisper, "Everything's ready." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. I gave a single nod. David had texted earlier, presentation system linked, test run complete. All that remained was timing. At 1 o'clock sharp, I slipped away to the restroom and changed into the suit. My reflection in the mirror looked composed but different, sharper around the edges. The disguise I had worn for 2 weeks, brown eyes, soft tones, modest cardigans, was gone. I fastened the silver watch my father had given me on my 21st birthday and felt the weight of it anchor me. When I stepped out into the hallway, a few employees stared, their confusion softened by recognition they couldn't quite place. I smiled politely and walked toward the conference room. Through the glass, I could see Amanda gesturing animatedly at a projector screen, her blonde hair gleaming under the recessed lights. The Value Corp. Team sat opposite her, flipping through printed proposals. I knocked once. No one answered, so I opened the door. Every head turned. Amanda frowned, irritated. "This is a closed meeting," she said, without looking closely. "I know," I replied. My voice, back to its natural tone, filled the room in a way I hadn't heard in years. "But I think you'll want to hear me out." For a moment, the world seemed to stop moving. Her eyes narrowed as she searched my face, recognition dawning like a crack in a window spreading fast. "Sophia." "Yes," I said softly. "The same sister you told everyone to forget." "The Value Corp." CEO Peter Thompson looked from her to me with measured curiosity. "Should we know who this is?" Amanda stammered, caught off guard. "She's nobody." "Correction," I said. "I'm the daughter of William Davis, founder of this company, and as of last week, majority controller of its shares." I placed a folder on the table and slid it forward, the legal documents inside bearing fresh ink. My mother stepped into the doorway just then, calm and composed, her presence filling the room with quiet gravity. "She's telling the truth," she said. "Sophia now holds the controlling proxy." Amanda's color drained. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have." I nodded to David, who waited just outside. He stepped in, laptop in hand, and with a few keystrokes, the presentation screen flickered. The neat, curated slides Amanda had prepared vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet dense with numbers and transactions. I moved beside the screen, pointing with deliberate precision. "These," I said, "are payments made from Davis Tech's accounts to shell companies with no employees or physical addresses. Over $300,000 in the last 6 months alone, each one approved by Amanda Davis and CFO Greg Wilson." Greg shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the door. Peter Thompson leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Is this true?" Amanda started to speak, but I continued. "And these, another slide, are internal emails between Davis Tech and Value Corp. Executives. They show prearranged consulting contracts promising millions in personal compensation after the acquisition." "That's not a merger, Mr. Thompson. That's a payoff." Silence followed long enough to feel like a verdict. Thompson's expression hardened, his team already gathering their papers. "This meeting is over," he said finally. "Value Corp. will withdraw its offer effective immediately." Amanda rose, desperate. You don't understand. This company can't survive. I turned to her. It can just not under you. Thompson and his team left in a rush, leaving the rest of us in the echo of their exit. My mother stood quietly by the wall, eyes wet but proud. The executives, who had spent years feeding off the company's decay, sat frozen. I opened the second folder termination letters printed on official letterhead. Greg Wilson, I said evenly, you're dismissed for falsifying financial reports and breach of fiduciary duty. His mouth opened in protest, but no words came. Tiffany Moore, same cause. Jordan Pike, deliberate misrepresentation to clients. And Ashley Howard, complicity in wrongful terminations. Security, already alerted by David, entered and escorted each one out as I spoke their names. None looked at me on their way to the door. The room grew lighter with every exit. Finally, only Amanda remained. She stood across from me, her once sure posture unraveling into defiance. You've wanted this for years, she hissed. To humiliate me? No, I said, quieter now. To stop you from destroying what Dad built. Her voice cracked sharp and small. He loved you more. He loved us both, I said. You just couldn't stand that love wasn't something you could control. She glared at our mother, who met her eyes without flinching. I should have stopped this long ago, Mom said softly. But I let my fear of losing one daughter blind me to the one I was already losing. Amanda's jaw trembled. This isn't over. It is, I said. Go home, Amanda. She tried to speak again, but the words wouldn't form. When security took her gently by the arm, she didn't resist. The door closed behind her, leaving only the hum of the overhead lights. For a long moment, I stood still. Every sound seemed magnified, the faint ticking of a clock, the distant murmur of phones outside, the quiet breath of my mother beside me. Then I exhaled. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was release, the kind that comes when you've held your breath for too many years. I turned to Rachel, who had been waiting by the doorway, uncertain whether to enter. Gather everyone, I said. All staff conference room 2. She nodded and hurried off. Within minutes, the room filled engineers, assistants, sales reps, clerks. The same faces I'd seen each morning behind tired smiles and quiet endurance. They stood clustered together, whispering. I took the front, my mother at my side. For those who don't know me, I began. I'm Sophia Davis, daughter of the founder, and as of today, interim CEO. A murmur ran through the room. Some recognized me from those 2 quiet weeks in the cubicles. Their expressions carried a mix of surprise and relief. I came here undercover to see what had happened to my father's company, I said. What I found was painful, but also hopeful. Painful because of what was taken from you. Hopeful because of what I saw in the way you kept working despite it. Rachel's eyes met mine. David stood near the back, arms folded, listening. I can't promise everything will be easy, I continued, but I can promise this: no more lies, no more favoritism, no more fear. I paused, letting the quiet settle. And no layoffs. We rebuild together. A single clap started somewhere near the back, then another, until the sound grew warm and steady, filling the room with something I hadn't heard here before: belief. When the meeting ended, Rachel stayed behind. You did it, she said softly. I shook my head. We started it. Outside, the city glowed with the pale light of late afternoon. From the window, I could see the river winding past glass towers, the same one my father used to point out from this floor years ago. Chicago's a mirror, he used to say. You can't fake who you are when you look into it. I looked out at that reflection now and felt both heavy and free. The fight wasn't finished, not by a long shot. There were contracts to fix, lawsuits to prepare for, and a future to protect. But the first truth had been spoken aloud, and once spoken, it couldn't be buried again. As I left the building that evening, the wind off the lake carried the faint scent of rain. I stopped under the old company sign, its edges cracked, but still holding on, and traced the raised letters with my fingertips. My father's name. My name. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe without waiting for permission. The days that followed were quiet in the way a storm leaves the air, behind it still heavy, expectant. The company felt different without Amanda's presence. Her perfume no longer lingered in the hallways, and the constant click of her heels was replaced by something softer, the sound of people breathing easier. On Monday morning, I arrived before sunrise. The building stood in the half-light, its windows reflecting the pale blue of early dawn. Inside, the lobby was empty, except for the security guard who straightened as I walked in. He greeted me by name this time. That small gesture mattered more than I could say. I took the elevator to the top floor and stopped outside Amanda's old office. The door was still closed, the brass plaque reading Chief Executive Officer. I removed it carefully and handed it to the janitor passing by. "You can store this in the archive," I said quietly. "We won't need it anymore." Instead of taking that office, I moved into a smaller one beside the open work area where most of the staff sat. I wanted to be reachable, visible. The first morning, a few employees slowed as they passed my door, almost uncertain whether to say good morning. By the end of the week, they did. Rachel became my second heartbeat. Her desk overflowed with files as she worked to piece together the company's real finances. She stayed late every night, a cup of peppermint tea cooling beside her calculator. David spent most of his time in the server room repairing what Amanda's negligence had broken both in the systems and in people's faith. We met every evening around 6, sharing takeout from the diner across the street. The three of us would sit around the long conference table, maps of overdue contracts spread out before us, the sound of rain tapping against the glass. Those hours were exhausting, but honest. For the first time, the work felt meaningful again. The first test came 2 weeks later. Amanda filed a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination and ownership rights. The summons landed on my desk like a reminder that old habits die hard. My attorney, Michael Tran, an old colleague from San Francisco, flew in to help. He reviewed the evidence, our financial records, the emails, the fraudulent contracts, and leaned back with a sigh. "She doesn't have a case," he said, "but she'll try to wear you down. People like her always think persistence can rewrite truth." It didn't scare me, but it did exhaust me. Every new letter from her lawyers reopened a wound that hadn't healed yet. Mom noticed it first. She started visiting the office more often, bringing sandwiches or simply sitting in the lounge to talk with the older employees who remembered my father. She had been quiet for years, retreating after his death. But lately, she moved with new purpose, like she was finally making peace with the choices she'd made. One evening, after a particularly long day, she stopped by my office as I was shutting down my computer. "You're working too much," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "There's still so much to fix," I told her. "There will always be something to fix," she said gently. "But you can't rebuild a legacy if you burn yourself out doing it." I smiled. "You sound like Dad." She hesitated, then crossed the room and took my hand. "I favored your sister," she said. I thought I was protecting her, but I was really protecting myself from her anger, from her disappointment. "You didn't need me," or so I told myself. It was easier that way. Her voice broke just slightly. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I see now how much I asked you to carry alone." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air vent. For years I'd imagined that apology rehearsed what I might say if it ever came. But in that moment, I didn't need to say much. "We can't change it," I said softly. "But we can stop repeating it." She nodded, tears caught in her lashes. That was the night something inside both of us shifted. No forgiveness demanded, just understanding, finally shared. As spring turned to summer, the company began to find its rhythm again. We rehired 2 former engineers who had been forced out under Amanda's leadership. Marcus, the head of sales, brought back clients who'd left in frustration. Rachel finalized a new budget, one built on real numbers instead of fantasies. I approved raises for the lowest paid staff first. They were the backbone, the ones who had kept the lights on when everything else failed. By the 3rd month, our office no longer felt like a place people endured. Laughter returned, hesitant at first, then genuine. Coffee mugs reappeared on desks. Someone hung a plant near the window, and another brought a radio that played softly during breaks. Small things, but they mattered. Of course, Amanda didn't disappear easily. Her lawyers requested mediation, and for several tense weeks, we prepared for hearings that never came. Eventually, the truth of our evidence broke through their bluster. The settlement offer was simple. She would drop all claims in exchange for a modest severance under strict confidentiality. I accepted, not because I wanted peace with her, but because I wanted peace for everyone else. Afterward, I drove to the lakefront parking where my father used to take me when I was a child. The water shimmered with late afternoon light, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the wind. I sat there for a long time thinking about the price of justice. It never arrives clean or gentle. It's earned through exhaustion, sacrifice, and the decision to keep showing up even when no one thanks you for it. By the time the company hit its 6-month mark under new leadership, we had stabilized financially. Payroll was current vendors paid, and for the first time in years, we were operating with a profit. Rachel announced it at the Friday staff meeting, holding up a chart like it was a diploma. The room erupted in applause. I laughed quietly, watching faces light up, the same people who had once walked through these halls afraid of what each day might bring. Later that evening, after everyone left, I wandered through the office alone. The soft glow from the hallway lights reflected off framed photos of the staff from the early days, my father shaking hands with his first team, smiling like he'd just discovered what purpose felt like. I stopped in front of his picture and touched the edge of the frame. "We made it back," I whispered. "Not all the way, but close." The following month brought a breakthrough I hadn't dared to imagine. A longtime client who had nearly cut ties under Amanda returned with a major contract enough to secure our future for the next 2 years. That same week, a tech journal featured an article on Davis Tech's recovery, calling it one of the most inspiring corporate turnarounds of the decade. We celebrated quietly, a catered lunch, a toast, with sparkling cider in the break room. I kept my speech short. "This isn't about me," I said. "It's about all of you who stayed, who believed in something worth saving. My father used to say, a company is only as good as the people who love it enough to fight for it. I think he'd be proud today." As the room filled with applause, I caught sight of Rachel, tears glimmering behind her glasses, and David grinning like a man who'd finally seen proof that hard work pays off. For the first time since returning to Chicago, I felt steady in my own skin. That night, my mother and I drove home together. The city shimmered beyond the windshield, neon signs, red taillights, windows glowing in 1,000 different shades. She turned to me at a stoplight and said, "You know, your father always said you'd be the one to carry the torch. He told me once, Sophia sees the world not as it is, but as it could be." I didn't understand that until now. I smiled, faintly, eyes on the road ahead. He taught me that hope isn't something you inherit, you build it. When we reached her house, I walked her to the door. The porch light flickered just like it had when we were children. She hugged me before stepping inside. I stood there for a moment after she closed the door. listening to the quiet neighborhood around me. The sound of wind through trees, a dog barking somewhere down the street. The faint hum of life continuing. The next morning, I returned to the office early again. The sun was rising over the skyline, gold spilling between the buildings. From the window, I could see the city stretching awake, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing something. I had caught it, the peace that comes after standing your ground. I thought about Amanda, then wondering where she was. Somewhere far away, I hoped finding her own reckoning. The anger that once burned in me had cooled into something else, understanding, maybe even pity. As the light filled the office, I turned toward the sound of footsteps. Rachel appeared at the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're here early," she said, smiling. "So are you." She handed me one and looked out the window beside me. "It feels different here now," she said. "Lighter." I nodded. That's what happens when people stop working out of fear. We stood there for a moment, watching the sun rise over the city my father loved. It bathed the old Davis Tech sign in light, catching the silver letters so they gleamed like new. It was then I realized we hadn't just saved a company. We had restored its soul. Outside, the day waited, and I knew deep down that something else was coming, a letter, a voice, maybe even forgiveness. But for now, there was work to do and peace to keep. Morning sunlight reached across my desk, soft and gold, washing over the papers, like a promise I hadn't dared to make a year ago. The city was just waking outside, horns' distant wind carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. Inside the office, it was still and clean, the kind of quiet that holds its own weight. Rachel had already left a stack of reports by the door, her neat handwriting looping in the margins. We'd made it 1 full year since Amanda's departure. Davis Tech Solutions wasn't just alive, it was growing. New contracts, old clients returning, fresh graduates joining with the same hunger I once had. The hum of creation had replaced the hum of dread. Sometimes I'd catch myself pausing in the middle of a meeting, listening not for silence but for laughter. It drifted through the corridors, now like sunlight through open blinds. Small things, the scrape of chairs, the rhythm of typing, the smell of fresh coffee had become proof of life returning. That afternoon, we were hosting a modest celebration for our first major product launch under new leadership. The conference room had been rearranged with simple elegance, white lilies, sandwiches, paper cups of sparkling cider. No banners, no speeches. Just people who'd survived something together, now allowed to breathe. Rachel was the first to arrive, sleeves rolled up, her usual calm energy filling the room. David followed, balancing a tray of pastries that he insisted on baking himself. "Don't tell anyone I used to do this in college," he said, smiling. I promised his secret was safe. As employees began to gather, I stepped back, letting them have the moment. Their laughter, the easy conversation, the relief, it was theirs, not mine to claim. I watched as Rachel toasted quietly to honest work and second chances. The room glowed with something purer than victory. Later, as the crowd thinned and people returned to their desks, Rachel approached me with a small envelope. "This came for you," she said. Her expression was unreadable. The handwriting on the front was familiar. My name written in ink that had hesitated at each letter. Amanda. I waited until the office emptied before I opened it. The letter was brief, barely a page. Sophia. I've spent this year trying to understand what I did and why. There's no excuse. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you know I see it now how much I hurt you and how much I wasted what Dad built. I'm working at a small real estate office in Denver. It's quiet. I'm learning to listen to show up to live without pretending to be more than I am. If you ever find space for it, I'd like to see you again. Not as a sister who wants something, but as a person trying to start over. Amanda. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into my desk drawer. The anger I'd once carried felt distant now, like a noise I'd turned off and forgotten to miss. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something quieter, understanding. That weekend I booked a flight to Denver. The coffee shop was small, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. Amanda was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, hair shorter, expression softer. The woman who looked up when I entered was nothing like the one who'd thrown a drink in my face. She stood uncertain. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "I didn't come for closure," I said. "I came because I didn't want to carry this weight anymore." We sat for a while without speaking. The sunlight shifted through the window, warming the table between us. She told me about her job, entry-level steady, about taking night classes in accounting, about how for the first time she was learning what it meant to earn trust instead of demand it. When she paused, I asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" Her eyes met mine. "Every day. But regret doesn't rebuild anything. I'm just trying to live differently now." For a long moment, I studied her face, the fine lines that responsibility had drawn, the humility that had replaced pride. I believed her. When we parted, she reached out and touched my hand, tentative and human. "Take care of yourself, Sophia." "You too," I said. On the flight back to Chicago, I looked out over the clouds, the world below blurring into soft white. For the first time, the past didn't feel like an anchor. It felt like something I'd walked through and finally left behind. Weeks later, when Davis Tech opened its new client support office in Denver, I made a decision that surprised nearly everyone, including myself. I offered Amanda a position not in leadership, but in client relations under Rachel's supervision. When Mom asked why, I told her the truth. Because peace costs less than resentment, and because everyone deserves a chance to do better if they choose to. She smiled in that quiet, knowing way of hers. "Your father would be proud of you." Maybe. But I'd stopped needing that kind of proof. By fall, the Denver office was running smoothly. Amanda worked quietly, keeping her distance, but doing the job well. Rachel's reports described her as reliable, reserved, and professional. That was enough. Back in Chicago, I found myself settling into a new rhythm. The company's success had steadied, freeing me to think beyond profit and recovery. Together with Rachel and David, we launched a mentorship initiative for young women entering the tech field, something my father would have called a legacy with legs. The day we announced it, I stood by the window of my office as the late afternoon sun caught the edge of the skyline. The reflection in the glass showed a woman who had stopped chasing worth and started living it. That evening, Mom joined me for dinner at a small restaurant by the river. The lights from the bridge shimmered across the water like moving stars. She raised her glass. "To your father," she said softly. I smiled. To what he built, and to what we're building now. After dinner, I walked alone for a while, the air cool against my face. The streets were alive with quiet music from nearby cafes, people laughing, the scent of roasted chestnuts from a corner cart. Ordinary sounds of life continuing, no tension, no dread. When I reached the Riverwalk, I stopped to watch the water catch the light. Somewhere in the distance, a train crossed the bridge, its faint rumble fading into the night. I thought about the long road that had brought me here, the humiliation, the loss, the work, the small mercies that had kept me going. I'd come back to save a company, but I'd ended up saving something else myself. Not through revenge or triumph, but through steady grace, through choosing peace when the world expected bitterness. I ran my fingers along the cool railing, and breathed in the scent of rain on stone. Somewhere out there, Amanda was rebuilding, Mom was finding purpose again, and Davis Tech was thriving in the hands of people who believed in it. The world had tilted back toward balance, not perfectly, but enough. The last thing my father ever told me was that integrity isn't what you say, it's what you keep doing after no one's watching. Standing there in the fading light, I finally understood what he meant. Peace, I realized, isn't something handed to you. It's something you decide to keep one quiet choice at a time. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever found strength in setting your own peace above revenge, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Sometimes just listening is its own kind of healing.